Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'd like to thank everyone on the FAST board for inviting me to join this virtual summit. I'd like to thank David and Martha Gerzik for allowing me to share the content and the pictures, and thank David for taking most of the pictures and the video. Chandler is my client. Their son Chandler is my client, and David is part of the FAST board. So I'd like to thank everybody for this opportunity. And it's really one of the highlights of my year, and it's one that I hope continues for many years to come. So this is what therapy looked like prior to COVID-19. Some of you may recognize a few of these slides from last year's presentation, a few of these pictures from last year's presentation. And I did that intentionally because that is truly what therapy looked like back then. What you see here is a team of therapists. You see treatment rooms, a whole slew of supplies and space, and most significantly, the clients came to us. It was a traditional treatment model, one of which we were proud of for sure. This is what therapy became for everyone all over the country, if not major parts of the world. And this isn't me, and it isn't my therapist working with a client who has Angelman, but it's a good representation of how many of us were spending our time then. And then I closed my clinic for good. Without belaboring that story, the beautiful thing about today is that you get the choice to make it better than yesterday. So on this day, when I texted David en route to his house to drop off teletherapy supplies, I was texting him to let him know that I was running behind. And he responded back with, "That's fine, unless you'd like to try therapy over the fence. It's a beautiful day." And I chuckled, didn't think about it, laughed and thought, "Oh, David, that's funny," kept driving. And was en route to their home and stopped at the next light. And I thought, why not? So I texted him back and I said, "Sure, why not? Let's give it a try, LOL. I'll be there in a few." I arrived at David's house. That's me on the other side of his fence, not in jail, and Chandler, seemingly happy to see me. And I want to show you a video of what transpired when I arrived. Oh, sorry. And I want to show you another one. And so began my new job as a mobile OT. And what David doesn't know is that when I posted with permission to Instagram, this post inspired so many other therapists to step outside their comfort zone and to try some creative ways of returning to see children in person. And what I think it's done is challenged people to think differently about the way we typically work with children. And so in today's session, I want to inspire you, parents and professionals, to think creatively about how you can use effective evidence-based strategies in non-traditional, creative ways to support the angels you love to build skills. We'll be taking a look at clinic-based versus other models of therapy. We'll be talking about principles of development, because when we understand what's supposed to happen, it's easier to have realistic expectations and to structure things. We'll be talking about task analysis and activity modification so that we can better break things down and support learning of new skills. And we'll be discussing new ways of working in the home with what we have, whether it's to compensate or remediate a challenge. There's therapeutic value in getting back to the basics. So let's start with some principles of development. I highlight collaborative understanding here on this slide because OT is a broad field. It incorporates many concepts from various fields of science, and I've listed some of them here. Things like polyvagal theory, Hebb's law from neurology. We'll talk about positioning and stability, which comes from motor learning. And I think it's important for us to consider sequential order of development. And I don't know where that comes from. I just feel like I've always known it as an OT, and maybe I'm getting old and that's why I don't remember, but anyway, it's important. Social development and Piaget's stages of cognitive development. All of these principles of development are helpful at informing the science and the efficacy behind in-home and mobile therapy models. So let's start with polyvagal theory. This theory was put together by Dr. Stephen Porges. And basically what he says is that we are wired to connect and function within relationships. We are hardwired for connection. And what I take this to mean is that we are sensory input for our children. Thus, we may be the most therapeutic tool we have. With Hebb's law, that states that neurons that fire together wire together. If we can get multiple neural channels firing effectively to accomplish something successfully, the brain will want to do it again. And there's such a thing as neural learned helplessness. When a child has never done something before, they don't know that they can do it. And us telling them verbally, we can talk to them until we're blue in the face, but they're never going to grasp the fact that they can do it. That will change their motivation to try. But the other thing is that across the board with neurodevelopmental differences, we see a shift in inherent drive and in the number of repetitions it takes to accomplish something. What this does is it emphasizes for me the need for many more repetitions of the same task in order to learn. And thus, the more neurons we get firing together at the time of learning, the more likely we are to embed that experience for later retrieval. So let's talk briefly about some specifics. So positioning and stability, why is this so important? We need positioning and stability for optimal function. I challenge anybody to stand on one foot and try to do high-level math. Now, if you're one of the scientists presenting in this virtual summit, you've got better odds than I would have, but most people would struggle to stand on one foot and do higher-level math or learn a Shakespearean sonnet. This is because physical stability creates a strong foundation for learning and for physical development. And when I talk about positioning, I mean alignment of the spine and pelvis and supporting the ability to hold a position without feeling off balance. Think of yoga. They're often saying stability first, the rest will follow. The other thing to remember is that movement comes from the core, and if alignment is off, the perception of movement by the rest of the body becomes skewed. In this picture, you can see my hands are on Chandler's hips, right down low to his pelvis. He's sitting on a yoga block for some positioning, some stability, and we position the supplies off to his right so that he has to reach across midline. So we can think about positioning of supplies or of person or of ourselves. Let's look at the next one, sequential order. So sequential order means not that development happens in a linear fashion, but that there are predictable stages to development. Gross motor comes before fine motor, which comes before cognitive. And we also know that self-regulation is at the foundation of all motor skills. So that if somebody is dysregulated, it's going to be harder for them to do a motor task. So again, all development is not linear, but we know that sensory motor is at the foundation of higher level learning. And I just want to point out the picture here at the top of the slide of me sitting with Chandler, you can see the position that Chandler's sitting in. He's in such a position that he's easily able to sit upright. He's in a relaxed state, but he's doing it so in a way that allows his body to support both hands at midline to hold that tube. He's not leaning, he's not sitting on something that's going to topple over, he's not trying to reach too far so that his balance is off. He's sitting in a very stable, functional position. And I love this picture because he's so engaged. And lastly, Piaget's cognitive development and play stages. So sensory motor, object permanence, pre-operational, and concrete operational is the order of those stages. But it doesn't mean that once a child reaches a stage that they're not going to back up. And so I think that's also important for us to remember as parents and professionals supporting children, that they're going to ebb and flow, and it depends on multiple variables, how quickly they progress and whether they stay at one stage or not. So this visual shows how that foundation translates to skill development. This is my interpretation, and many of you may have seen this before, by Williams and Schellenberger. They call it their learning triangle or pyramid of learning. It's an oldie but a goodie. And on the left over here, you'll see that I have kind of translated early skills and gradually increasing complexity, skills of increasing complexity. And so the other thing I want you to notice is that down here is the central nervous system and sensory processing. And I don't know if it's showing it in the same way on your slide or not, so I apologize if it's not, but at the very bottom of the triangle is sensory processing. And we need sensory processing in order to support higher level functioning. If none of these things on the bottom existed, or if they're gaps or holes or they're not working efficiently, then all of the things up on the top of the triangle are going to be much harder to achieve. The other thing I'd like to point out is that academic learning is at the very top. And we need all of these other skills in order to be ready and more successful at academic learning. In daycares and early primary grades, academic learning is being more and more emphasized. And for some kids, that's fine. But if we think about kids who struggle with all of these things, it's no wonder that academic learning becomes a challenge. It's easy for us to forget with our grown-up brains that academics isn't necessarily what we want to be prioritizing every time. So now that we understand a little bit about development and what we need to be prioritizing, let's consider what to do with that knowledge. As OTs, I consider task analysis to be one of our superpowers, but it can be simplified into some basic categories: gross motor, fine motor, visual motor, and relating or social function. Now, I've also listed a separate category for sensory, because sensory is sometimes very easy to observe, sometimes not. But I think it's important for us to remember, just like it showed us in the triangle, in the learning pyramid, that sensory is at the foundation of everything we do. Our senses are the bridge. They're the bridge between physical and mental and emotional health, and they determine how we feel. And Virginia Spielman at the Star Center said, "How we feel changes everything." That's her quote. They're about how we feel, and how we feel changes everything. And so these are pictures of Chandler that I'd like to use to help us break down the activities that we're doing at the park, in hopes that it helps you see some examples of things that you can either be doing at home, or so that it helps you think differently about some of the things that you're already doing. So here's Chandler retrieving a ball from a tree using a long stick. And David was the brainchild of this fantastic activity, and he deserves Dad of the Year award for jumping higher than I ever could to lodge the ball in the tree branches over and over. And you'll see here that Chandler is using both hands. He's working on balance. He's got some head, neck, trunk dissociation as he looks up, which is actually helpful for developing physical skills. He's working on use of force so that he can successfully use the stick on the ball. He's using upper extremity strength, coordination against gravity, and motor planning and praxis, which is having the idea of something to do, sequencing the steps together, and then executing. Here, Chandler's playing at a water table, and this is his water table, and I brought sponges in hopes that we could have him squeeze them to work on some hand strengthening, and I brought different size containers. Chandler opted instead to scoop and pour, and he avoided the sponges, I think because they took too long or they were too hard to squeeze. He also picked up and placed small stones through the little hole in the table, so we got some good fine motor work in that way. Now, you can see here that he's working on grasp because of the varied sizes of the objects and the cup. He's working on some intrinsic hand strengthening from the squeezing, but also even just holding a cup can be strengthening. In-hand manipulation for tool use. He's working on forearm supination, and he's working on tactile tolerance or seeking. Now, I don't think Chandler has a hard time seeking water, and I know that water play is a love of many children with Angelman syndrome. And so in this one, we're not working on that, but what we're doing is using his inherent interest to guide him towards doing some things that might be difficult. And you can do that really with anything. You could change the water, you could add things to the water, you could use objects other than the water by turning it into a sensory table, like a bin with beans and rice, or corn kernels, dried pasta. And if your child is older, you don't need a sensory table or a water table. You could do it at the sink, or with a bin at the counter during mealtime for food prep. You can work on all of these skills in many ways, but you can see this playful way of building some fine motor skills. And here we are doing a target toss game. These are used but washed styrofoam trays from the grocery store and a bean bag. And you can see how close I'm standing and how close I'm holding mine. Trying not to get too close given COVID, but you can see the hand over hand support that David is giving Chandler, and you can see Chandler leaning back into David for postural support. This is a lot to manage all at one time for a little guy. And really, he's working on so many skills. If we were to do it over again, because it didn't last long, but if we were to do it over again, which we might, I would cut a hole in the tray so that he had another target to shoot for. And because he very much likes cause effect, the beanbag could drop down. And then he could bend over and pick it up. And so we'd be getting some gross motor and some vestibular work that way. So some of the skills that he's working on here: visual attention, visually directed hand movements, binocular vision, postural ocular responses, hand-eye coordination, depth perception, and timing and rhythmicity. And you thought we were just playing. It's a lot. And here I am running alongside Chandler as he drags his hand along the metal posts. And I was truly delighted at the tactile input that he was getting here, and that he was able to do both at the same time, running and dragging his hand along. We were laughing and we did this repeatedly. And while the skills he's getting are not outwardly measurable, the connection from joining him and sharing in the fun is likely serving me throughout the session and from session to session. He wants to keep doing. And it's my job to challenge and repeat at that just right level to get him to a higher level of ability. So I'd like to play you another little video now. In that jumping video, you could see where Chandler initially disengaged, but then I was playful and called him back and he returned. I like to think he might not have done that if we didn't have the connection and if the activity weren't fun or enjoyable. I also then added tactile input to his upper body. By doing that, I was giving him balanced input to upper and lower. Now, he did stop jumping on his own, and I was doing the lifting, but the body input continued. And it's also possible that by using that kinesthetic input, he was better able to make sense of the number sequence. So that's what my thought process was for that. And you can see through all of these play experiences that I've shared that it's completely possible to create therapeutic opportunity in these play-based activities. But you might be saying, that's fine, but what about these times when they don't want to do something or you're not playing? And so this is when we have to modify. All of the park activities were modified ongoing, and the still shots that I've shared are not an accurate representation of the challenges or the ongoing adaptations that David and I made throughout the activities. But yeah, sometimes he's a better OT than I am. But our goal with every activity is to find that just right fit. And in order to do that, we consider the person, the environment, or the task. And so by that, I mean, person variables might be Chandler's abilities, how much sleep he's had, is he hungry, what's his attention like, what are his current skill level for this type of task, what are his desires, his interests, or his perceptions. Those are all person variables. Where we're doing the activity is the environment. So the park is going to have different affordances or opportunities than the front porch or the side yard, and vice versa. The front porch may be easier to concentrate versus a park that might have other children there. But there are cars going by the front porch. So, we think about the environment for the type of task we're offering, and we try to change it up. And then task variables might include things like how many supplies, how many steps, how are we giving the instructions, or how many instructions are we giving at one time. And so all of these things come together to create a fit or no fit. And fit equals function. So to get that fit, we want to layer on or layer off the challenge. Any of the person, environment, or task variables can make for a challenge. If something's too challenging, the child disengages. Sometimes if something's too easy, the child disengages because they're bored. And so finding that just right fit creates an opportunity for neural connections to be made, and sometimes a person connection like this hug. And so you can see in this task, I cut off the tops of containers and washed them out, and then I duct taped them to a board. And so Chandler was being asked to twist off the tops to build some in-hand manipulation skills. What we found is that he liked putting tiny things into the containers, and so it became more of a step. There was a new step to the sequence. So he would put something in, we would put the lid on. He took the lid off, he tried to dump it out. He put something in, put the lid on. And so there was more of a repetition of a motor sequence versus just placing and dropping. And so I felt like this was a perfectly matched activity for Chandler, and he kind of adapted it himself to create that extra step. I'm going to show you another video. And what I want you to do when you watch this video is try and notice the adaptations and the modifications that I'm making so that Chandler can be successful. So you saw already some of the modifications that I was making. First, I gave the instruction and I used my finger to point out all the numbers, but that was too much. So I tapped and pointed to 2. Chandler went to pull off 2, but it was too hard. He disengaged, and then I made it a little easier by picking it. keeping it fun. Want you to watch another one. So you saw that Chandler started getting frustrated, and then in the end did get frustrated. He pulled off my mask. But you saw at the very beginning, he got frustrated. I removed the input and then returned it. So in hopes that he would re-engage, and he did. And he was able to sustain that effort. It got hard for him though. And so, you heard him saying, all done, all done. That was him communicating, I don't want to do this. But I was challenging him and pushing and trying to adapt along the way. And ultimately, we got a lot of really good repetitions there and some good engagement. And what this video brings up for me is that I really want to highlight negative behavior, or what we consider poor behavior, is not anything but communication. And so there's something that we're missing, either the window of backing off, or trying to adapt even more so that it's doable for him or for any child when there's a negative behavior happening. Now, many people would say, are you giving in? And that's a whole other behavioral discussion. But I really want to point out that we need to interpret behavior as communication. And Mona Delahook is a psychologist that's doing a lot of work in this area right now. She has a book called Beyond Behaviors, and that's by Mona Delahook. And I would encourage anybody who's struggling with negative behaviors in their child or family to take a look at Mona Delahook's work. And so lastly, I want to say a little bit about challenge as far as perceived effort. Many children perceive the challenge when we think that they can do it. And so we just keep trying to get them to do it. But challenge may simply mean too much effort. And the child isn't being lazy, they aren't being oppositional, they're letting us know that it's too hard, and so we adjust. We don't necessarily let them get away with not doing it, but we modify or adapt the task so that they can adjust. Here are some non-play tasks that you can use at home to build all kinds of skills, and each and every one of these tasks can be modified to make it easier or harder on any given day. And that's the other thing to remember, is that just because a child can do something one day, it doesn't mean they'll be able to do it the next. And so we, as parents and caregivers, need to remember, or need to be ready to ebb and flow with their capacity on a given day. And so we want to be having activities that are adaptable, and we want to be able to adjust our expectations of them so that they can still complete the task. And so I want to point out a couple here that jump out at me that as favorites. Gardening for me is a favorite activity, not for myself. I actually don't love gardening personally, but it's a good activity to use with kids of all ages and abilities, because you can do it in so many ways, and because it's such a varied kind of task. You can have kids working on fine motor skills by digging, by sorting seeds, by carrying and watering with a watering can. You can have them snipping things using scissors. If a child doesn't have hand use, then you could simply have them join by having the flower pot on their lap. You can do gardening sitting on the ground or at a table. You can do it standing. There's so many ways that you can engage a child or a person in gardening. The other one that I like is going for walks. And so you may have a child that's ambulatory or not. And if they're not mobile, there's still ways to adapt a walk. So walking, you can hop, jump, run, or skip. You can march, you can go on tippy toes. And all of these different ways of going on a walk will change the input that the body gets. And it will challenge the child in different ways, or could. It might also be a little more fun. If a child is not ambulatory, they are riding in a wheelchair or in a stroller, they might be able to carry something on their lap so that they feel the weight of that item on their lap. They might be able to, there are many cities, this is one thing that I like doing now, many cities have the rocks that people are painting and then hiding for other people to find. And so maybe they could be responsible for dropping the rocks along the way, or for finding where the rocks are going to be hidden. And then any child or any person can do like a bingo match, find the things game. I recently saw something where there was an egg carton with different items in each section of the egg carton, and then the child had to find each of those items along the route. And then finally, I Spy, or just visually locating items like a visual bingo. So going for walks and gardening are two that I wanted to pull out here, but the others are all pretty self-explanatory. And actually, I'll say just a quick word about the stairs. Using the stairs, if your child is able to, is a really good opportunity for building physical skills, but stairs are usually used during transition times. And transition times can be pretty tricky for a lot of kids with any developmental disability. And so using the stairs in a different way is a way to change the transition. So it shifts their attention and it shifts what their experience is at that sometimes challenging time. So I encourage people to crawl, jump up or down, crawl up or down, bounce down the stairs on their bottom if it's safe to do so instead of walking. These are all ways that you can use stairs differently to build skills. And so regardless of the activity you're doing and how you are modifying it, I always like people to keep in mind the concepts of compensation versus remediation. And so compensation is making do. It's not teaching a skill. It's supporting, kind of, well, compensating, making do. I'll leave it there. Therapy is remediating or trying to fix an issue. And I don't expect parents to be therapists. And the suggestions that I'm giving might help to build skills simply by engaging the child in new patterns and by doing repetitions. Doing things over and over, and as we talked about with neurons that fire together, wire together, doing these kinds of different things in the home environment, or if you're trying to teach a new skill, modifying it and adapting it to meet the child where they're at and lead them forward gradually helps to build those multiple channels and give them multiple repetitions of success so that they'll progress hopefully sooner. And remember that regardless of whether you're compensating or remediating, it's all about function. Function is key. The one thing, word of caution, we don't want to overcompensate. And the best way to know if you're doing that is to pull back and see what happens. Sometimes kids who are used to you compensating for them will just stay disengaged. So re-engage, support, and then back off. An example that happened for me today during a session, a child was working on trying to hold a marker, and he has a neurodevelopmental disability. He has very low tone, struggling to hold a marker or a crayon. And so instead of doing full hand over hand for coloring, I held at the wrist and just kind of stabilized so that he could control his hand. And he did much better with his grasp once he was stabilized at the wrist. Remember, positioning and stability. So I positioned it functionally, stabilized it, and then he could operate his hand. So that's an example of adapting, but also compensating without overcompensating. When we overdo, a child doesn't own the task or experience what they need in order to learn how to do it on their own. And so I encourage people to change how you do something, not what you do. And here are some ways that you can do that. Use what you have. Use kitchen items, old food containers, scrap mail, packaging, toilet paper rolls, and the list goes on. These are all things, or mostly things, that people have in the home environment. It doesn't take a lot of expensive therapy equipment in order to do a therapeutic activity. Change position. Lying down on the back or the tummy or the side or even upside down. Being able to side sit or sit up against a wall, or sitting in a beanbag or a rocking chair, on a step or on a yoga block. These are all different ways of sitting, and if a child can accomplish the task and change the way they're sitting, then does it really matter how they're sitting, as long as they're staying engaged in the task? Slowing down. We as parents and caregivers need to slow down so that children can. Children with Angelman, we know, have hyperexcitability a lot of the time. And so us slowing down our responses leads the way for them to also slow down. Sometimes a cue of counting to 3 or taking a deep breath can help slow down an activity. Sometimes even just repetition, repetition, repetition before we move on to the next step not only builds neural connections, but will slow down the child rushing through a whole bunch of things all at once. And finally, less verbal. Use gestures and physical prompts. Use them more often. Exaggerate emotion. Use short phrases or combination phrases like you do, I like, all done, so that the child is better able to process that language if that's an area of concern. Some other things to change how we do activities. You can simplify by removing the number of items, the number of steps, or the number of instructions. You can enhance touch and vestibular input, like I did in the jumping video, helping him feel his body more strongly. Use their interests. Interest and perceived demands influence exploratory responses. So the more interested they are, the more possibility you have of them exploring that game or that activity. Now, if they're so interested that they get hyper excited, then we need to help them slow down. And like I did with the tape video, remove the input so that they can re-engage in a more functional state. And finally, praise the positives. Be specific with verbal praise, avoiding things like good job. Now I'm thinking back to the jumping video. I think I cheered at the end of that one saying, you did it. But cheering when the child knows that they've been successful can reinforce that accomplishment. Now, I don't know if Chandler felt successful or not. And so I could have been a little more specific about my feedback or my praise and saying things like, you jumped really high. I'm glad you came back to jump with me, those kinds of things. And so I go back to the beginning. When I closed my clinic, I had one primary concern. I had lots of concerns, but what about my clients? They were my primary concern, honestly. And I did worry about the type of practice that I'd be able to offer them. I'm a sensory therapist, so I love my swings and I knew that they worked. And so the clinic was my clinical comfort zone. But I am thrilled to say that Chandler is but one of many who are continuing to progress and who inspire and amaze me every day with their progress. Yes, some days are harder. Some days it's harder. And yes, you have to practice. Thinking this way doesn't just happen. But it's 100% possible to provide effective services via telehealth, via park therapy, via porch therapy, and in-home services. And it's 100% possible to learn how to provide skilled support as a parent in any environment. On those hard days and when behaviors are hard and progress seems slow, it's these times that I really hope we can remember that hard does not mean can't. We just need to find a different way. Thank you for joining me today, and I will share how you can reach me, and I will be available for the live Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.